When talking about the NES library of games, a company that will undoubtedly come up in the conversation is of course LJN. LJN really got thrust into the spotlight with the Angry Video Game Nerd series, where he reminisces about playing these games as a child and just didn't really like them. And I can understand that and appreciate that, but the Angry Video Game Nerd is a character. As time goes on, your gaming palette changes. You start to like games that maybe you didn't like as a kid. So much in fact that there's channels like the LJN Defender now who take a look at these games and try to find the good in them. But honestly, I don't think about LJN games at all for the NES because I just don't have to. I don't want to, and I don't really feel like it. Well, over on the Patreon page, one of our Patreons, Alan, decided that I should make a video on the top 5 LJN games for the NES. To which I said, "You sick sadistic son of a..." Which I said, "Hey buddy, that's a great idea, and I'm really looking forward to making this video." All jokes aside though, I was curious to find the best LJN games on the NES, because it's a company that, yes, gets ran through the mud a lot. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the top 5 LJN games for the NES. I'm not saying these games are necessarily great, but these are the best of the best from LJN on the NES. So sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into the world of LJN on the NES.
Hey, RGT 85. Hey, Sean.
Oh my God, it's Stevie Richards!
Number 5, Jaws. Jaws is one of the 3 movie-based entries on the list, as LJN always seemed to get publishing rights for all your favorite films and turning them into 8-bit NES games. Based on the classic 1975 film, Jaws is kind of a weird game. You play as a character trying to take out Jaws, obviously, but the gameplay is really weird and doesn't really make sense most of the time. You basically go from left to right on the overhead map going to ports. When you arrive at these ports, your weapons get upgraded so you do more damage to Jaws. While trying to visit these ports, you'll encounter random spots on the map where you go underwater and shoot things. The more stuff you shoot, like seashells, the more currency you get, which allows you to upgrade your weapons at these different ports. Eventually you'll have some battles with Jaws, but it's pretty difficult to take them out with your weak weapons, so you'll be visiting these ports pretty often to upgrade, and really that's a bulk of the gameplay. Going underwater, shooting crap, go to a port, get some better weapons, so on and so forth. Eventually you'll do enough damage to Jaws where the game switches to a first-person mode, where you have to stab Jaws, thus beating the game. I actually like the visual style of the first-person thing, and it's pretty tense as you only have a few tries to take down the Great White. The music kinda sucks and the game isn't all that great honestly, but I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. Certainly a mediocre NES game, but pretty far from the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the grand scheme of things. Try it out, you might like it, or you might not. Number 4, Friday the 13th. The second movie game featured on this list, Friday the 13th was one of the many R-rated movies that for some reason got an NES game. Because kids love R-rated movies, don't they? I know I sure did. Based on the 1980s horror franchise, Friday the 13th has you playing as one of 6 teenage camp counselors, each with unique attributes and abilities, in your quest to save Camp Crystal Lake from Jason Voorhees. Jason is going around trying to kill kids, yes, children, in this NES game, so your goal is to find him and take him out 3 times within 3 different day and night cycles. The weapon in the game that you start out with kinda sucks. It's just a rock that arches over a lot of enemies, so weapon upgrades are a must in this game. Jason can pop up pretty much anywhere on the map and in the game, and when either a counselor or a kid is in danger, you get this loud beeping sound that I really don't like. The map in the game is horrible and confusing, so it's best to familiarize yourself with it early in the game. While the side-scrolling segments have annoying music, Inside of the Cabins actually has one of my favorite tunes on the NES. It's haunting, it's spooky, and just a well-done musical track. Jason himself is purple for some reason, which was never a thing in the movies, but it's sort of become a cult image now, with even NECA figures featuring the purple ensemble, and the latest Friday the 13th game also having a downloadable costume as well. Friday the 13th could have been a really good game, but once again, I feel like it's a game that gets a lot of negative press for no real reason. Sure, there's problems with it. Yes, it's another mediocre movie title, but it's decent enough, especially if you're a fan of the source material. Number 3, Town & Country 2, Thrilla Safari. I honestly never knew Thrilla Safari was an LJN game until researching this list, because this game was a staple in my first apartment that I had in my early 20s. Town & Country 2, Thrilla Safari, or as we will call it for the rest of this video because that's what we called it in my house, Monkey Skateboarding, has you playing as Thrilla Gorilla trying to save his girl who got captured by a witch doctor. Evidently that happens a lot with monkeys. You play as a monkey on a skateboard and a surfboard throughout the game. I mean, do I really need to say anything about this game besides that? It's a monkey on a skateboard. That's literally one of the coolest things on earth, and this game brings it to your NES. Monkey skateboarding is basically a game of survival. You have to avoid obstacles, take out enemies, and acquire fruit to keep your life up. Visually speaking, I think it's a pretty good looking game, with lots of little details in the different African environments and on our monkey friend as well. The gameplay requires a good bit of memorization, but that's sort of the fun for the game, as it's very fast paced and very frantic. Boss battles are pretty fun as well, honestly. I've always enjoyed monkey skateboarding, so the fact that it happened to be an LJN published game just made it easy to get a spot in this list. Check it out, you won't hate it, or I don't know, maybe you will. Number 2, A Nightmare on Elm Street. The third and final movie licensed game on this list, A Nightmare on Elm Street was another horror R-rated franchise that found its way to the NES. Developed by Rare, A Nightmare on Elm Street is one of the most criminally underrated games on the NES, and I don't really get why people don't like it. Based on the horror franchise, A Nightmare on Elm Street has you playing as a teenager going around Elm Street trying to find Freddy's bones so that they can burn them and get rid of Freddy. Right off of the bat, the game is unique in that you can actually have up to 4 people play at once with an NES 4 score, which most platforming games don't have. Entering buildings can be a bit tricky as this game uses a time system that isn't really clarified, but it's not that hard to figure out. Once inside of a building, the game becomes a 2D platformer. As Freddy does his damage during when a person is asleep, the game has a sleep meter. When your sleep meter is depleted, you enter the dream world, which is basically the level you are in, but with enemies and item locations switched up along with the music. It's a pretty cool feature, and I like the deviation because you can get some cool weapons that are only available in the sleep world. Finding a boombox will wake up your character, and you can stay awake in levels by acquiring different cups of coffee. When you get all the bones in a level, you get a cool boss battle with Freddy, and some of them are pretty unique and feel like something you would actually see in one of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I really like the graphics and the music in the game, and the control is pretty solid as well. Horror games are always fun, and I consider A Nightmare on Elm Street to actually be a good NES game, regardless of the LJN tag or not. Number 1, The Punisher. Honestly, it was kind of tough deciding between this game and A Nightmare on Elm Street as the top LJN game on the NES. But I think The Punisher deserves a nod because it's an absolute hidden gem on the NES that nobody really talks about. Based on the Ultraviolet comic book series, The Punisher is a super unique game for the NES in the fact that it's a third-person on-rail shooters, which is a genre that isn't really represented on the NES. It honestly plays a good bit like Terminator 2, the arcade game, and that's a good thing as that game absolutely kicks ass. Playing as the Punisher, aka Frank Castle, your goal is to wipe out waves of enemies throughout New York City, along with different bosses, while trying to track down the man who killed your family, Kingpin. The game is pretty fast and frantic, with you having to shoot enemies and dodge bullets at the same time, and honestly the controls can take a bit of time to get used to. I really like the art style of the game as well. It's very dark and gritty, and the fact that there's a lot of stuff you can shoot in the background also makes the city feel more alive. The Punisher is honestly a bit of a mindless game, as you're just acquiring power-ups and blasting through waves of enemies over and over, but that's one of the things I actually like about the game. It sticks pretty close to the source material, it looks good, and it plays decent enough. There's lots of interesting things to do within the levels and surprises, and honestly, it's another really solid game that gets overlooked because of the LJN tag. The Punisher is definitely my favorite LJN game on the NES, and a game that I think more people need to check out because I honestly feel like they'll enjoy it, as it's pretty unique to the system. Alright, and those are my top 5 LJN games for the NES. Honestly, these games aren't that bad. Like, yes, they're not that great. A game like Jaws obviously isn't a great game, or maybe even a good game, but it's a mediocre game. And with how many bad games there are on the NES, just terrible games that look bad, play bad, make no sense, I think a lot of these games sort of get a negative moniker just because of how people perceive them to be. And I don't really think that's necessarily fair. I think games like The Punisher and A Nightmare on Elm Street are actually good games. They're actually fun games that are pretty unique to the NES. So let me know in the comment section down below what LJN games you like the most, and thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, and as always, I will catch you guys on the next video. Later.